What is up, everybody? I'm Jamal.
I'm Brandon, and this is The Way We Ball.
Brandon, we have an exciting episode today. As you've seen from the teasers, as you've seen from the title, we had none other than Houston's soccer royalty, Mr. Glenn Davis, on the show. Brandon, how does that sound as a first guest for the podcast?
I mean, that's landing a GOAT, an absolute legend in Houston soccer. And little peek behind the curtain, you and I were scrambling at first because it wasn't letting me onto our software for us to actually record with him. And then literally last second, I just popped up into it right before we got going. And it was like, oh my gosh, thank God we can do this.
It was one of those cases where anything that could go wrong or anything that might go wrong can and will. And luckily, by the soccer gods, you came in last second, literally crunch time, and got us in. But before we do that, we have a pretty important game, maybe even the most important game of the season for us so far. We have Portland this Saturday. So we'll, just to show you fans, we respect your time. I'm going to put a timer on for 5 minutes. So we'll do a quick 5 minutes on this Portland match, and then we'll go right into the interview. So Brandon, I don't know if you saw, we tweeted, basically we win and we're in. What I mean by in is that we're in as far as home field advantage, just a win, and we'll finish anywhere from 2 to 4, depending on the rest of the games on decision day. So just a win, and we'll have two through 4, one of those options. And I think it's pretty significant. We talked about it before, our home field advantage, especially this time of year. What are your thoughts on that?
So kind of looking as like a head-to-head matchup because we have to travel to Portland, and we haven't fared too well when we've gone to Portland. So in fact, looking at our total history, we faced Portland 25 times in history against each other, home and away. Portland's won 10 of those. We've won 7. We've drawn 8 times. But when we've gone to Portland, we've lost the last 4 straight in a difference of 10-3. So they've absolutely owned us on their pitch. Now, looking kind of more bigger picture here, it's looking at the two teams now. Portland, they've have a -9 goal difference on the season compared to us, which is a +16. But if you look at the numbers in terms of how many we score per game, they're at like 14.2 goals per game, and we're at 14.5. Now, it's super similar, but what's the biggest difference? They have 9 clean sheets compared to our 17. So it's showing you like how massive the keeper position is, especially with Clark. Now, the other stat that I started to kind of deep dive into it was looking more of like, well, where do we start to dominate between them two? So in terms of passing percentage, Portland's at like a 79% passing, where we're at an 81%. So super similar. But the biggest difference, the passes per game, they have 86 passes per game compared to our 112, where we dominate possession 52% of the time compared to their 48. So even though our numbers in terms of like goals per game and only 5 points separates us, when you really deep dive into the numbers, there's a massive difference in terms of our defense, possession, and again, the midfield having that owning of all that passing. That's what's like going to be the biggest step. And I think the biggest difference between the last 4 times that we faced off against them.
And to put it in layman's terms, this ain't your daddy's dynamo anymore. This is a new dynamo in town. So, I don't know. It's gonna be a good one. They have a lot to play for. They have a strong home crowd, as we all know. That's no secret, and they have the gift of sitting at home waiting for us to do that travel day. But I mean, this Dynamo team just performs and show up when we need them to most. I think this little mini rest they got during the international breaks gonna help.
Yeah, and there's no
Tons.
yellow. Yeah, and there's no yellow card accumulations for anybody. We're all healthy, so we have full guns blazing. And like you mentioned at the start, we're kind of sitting in the driver's seat in this. And what I mean by that is Portland right now is at 43 points. They're sitting in 7th. Now, if they don't win and they falter, they can fall all the way back as far as 11th and be completely out. Because in 11th place is Minnesota United sitting at 41 points. So 2 points separates 11 and 7. So really the pressure is all on them. And last time we faced Portland was at home where we dominated 5-0. So it's kind of, yes, the fans are going to be rocking and roaring, but with all that built up pressure and that dominance of already happening against them, I like our chances.
It's going to be an exciting one. As we said, just win and we have home field advantage. Brandon, we have about a minute and a half left before we jump into the interview with the soccer GOAT. Quick question. So we had two updates since our last episode. We announced the extension of our tour and Bartlow. What are your thoughts on that?
Tremendous. I mean, Artur is he's just 27 years old, so we locked him up for a couple of years, up to 2027, possibly with an option, which is amazing. Bartlow, I mean, he has been not only quality depth, but when he's starting, you can count on him. And we've mentioned before how big and deep our center back positions are. So locking up those two for the future, I mean, we're making all the right moves, and that's something that a lot of Dynamo fans should feel super positive about going into this stretch.
Yeah, no, I think we discussed it. Foreshadowing here, we discussed it in the interview with Glenn as well. Especially that Bartlow signing, kind of the kid's 22, 23. So that's
Yeah.
setting us up for a very long time in the back there, setting up an anchor in that back line, which has been impressive this year. And our tour, I mean, our tour has just been phenomenal. For many people signing of the off season. So that is it, Brandon. We are 5 seconds away from 5 minutes. We are going to jump into the interview with Glenn Davis. Hope you all enjoy it. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, The Way We Ball. And on all social medias, that's underscore The Way We Ball. We will see you all next week. Dale Dynamo. And this is The Way We Ball. The Way We Ball podcast is looking for partners. Would you like your business shouted out every single episode? Maybe you would like your logo here. Maybe here. Maybe you would like your logo as a presenting sponsor. We have a ton of opportunities and we're looking forward to help building your business as we build this podcast. So give us a shout at the Way We Ball podcast at gmail.com or hit us up on any of our socials underscore The Way We Ball. Again, that's the Way We Ball podcast at gmail.com or any of our socials underscore The Way We Ball. Now let's get back to the show. And we are back, everybody, to the Way We Ball podcast. Folks, today is a special day for the pod. We have our first guest, and me and Brandon figured what better way to kick things off than Houston soccer royalty, Mr. Glenn Davis. Glenn, how are you today?
Jamal, Brandon, thanks for having me on. I must say your backdrop is a lot better than mine. We got an Asian influence over here. We got more masks over here. So I feel a little bit shamed right now, but thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for the kind words, Glenn. I see an Alice Cooper poster back there, so I know you got good music taste. So great backdrop. Can't say anything besides that. Brandon, how are you this morning?
Doing well, Jamal. Thanks for asking, man. Glenn, let's not kind of beat around the bush here. Before we start to dive in deep into Dynamo talk, we kind of want to talk a little bit about your career as a player and also as a broadcaster. So, kind of first diving into your career as a player. Growing up, you had a coach, Tom McDonald. How did Tom really influence the passion of the game on you?
Well, Tom McDonald was affectionately called Mr. Mac, and by the grace of just good luck and connections in our town. At the time I grew up, soccer was not prevalent. Well, it was in the suburbs, but it wasn't being played as football should be played, right? It was all around ethnic pockets, all around New York City, all the areas around cities, right? That's where the game was being played by ethnic groups, right? Who brought over from their countries the game. So we got very lucky with this Scottish man, and he came out to our town, and I mean, he'd be out there 3-4 nights a week. He took a group of kids. He just made soccer the most interesting, exciting game. He used to do this thing at the end of practice when we were little guys, and he'd say, it's solo time. So he'd take the ball, and he'd had 16 little kids chasing him all over this giant field, trying to get the ball off him and falling down and getting up. And, but he taught me a great lesson before getting into youth coaching, ultimately. That was, you leave kids excited to come back the next time, right? You always end the training session on a high. But he was a huge influence. I had a brother that got drafted in the NASL as a goalkeeper. I had the Cosmos and Pelé nearby. So the combination of all these things really is what made soccer the most amazing game. But he's a man. I have his picture on the wall. I look at it every day. And I'm not here without him.
Well, you kind of actually mentioned typing in my second question there. Your brother Khan, as you mentioned, he was a goalkeeper not only at your alma mater as well, but at the dinner table. Who would you argue between the two was the better player between you and Khan?
Very different. He was a goalkeeper. He was a tremendous athlete. There was not specialization back in those days like there is now with goalkeepers and goalkeeping coaches and things. So a lot of times guys that were extremely athletic, ended up being goalkeepers. The better player. Just two really different, two different positions, and really my upbringing. I had a Mr. McDonald. He didn't have somebody like that. He was a guy that was raw and was identified. Turned into a great college goalkeeper and got scouted by Dennis Viollet, who was the former Manchester United goal scorer, who was in America at the time, and that's how he got drafted. And he was all set to play at that time in the NASL, and went back to get his things at college and jumped up in the air and tore his ACL. And at that time, there was no coming back from ACL. So that was it.
Man. So in 1985, around that time, you were captaining the Houston Dynamos, and you guys played against some Titan clubs like Sheffield United, Middlesbrough. But the big headline, y'all beat the United States national team 1-0. Can you kind of take us through that game?
Well, yeah, I think Art scored off a corner. So, this is why interviewing people from the past is a good thing, because your lens is different, and that only comes with time and experience. And this is why when I walk into Shell Energy Stadium or a stadium in Major League Soccer, it still blows me away to this day. When I walk in there for the next game in the playoffs, I look around and I just go, this is, I give my right arm, my left arm, my right leg to play in a game in a facility like this, because we played in, NFL stadiums, high school stadiums, a variety of places which were not designed for soccer at the time. So, back then the U.S. national team was, whoever was the coach pretty much had a group of guys that he was going to bring in. There was no real scouting system. There was none of this. There were excellent players. And, at that time with leagues struggling, our general manager, Jim Walker, who is another is a great soccer legend in Houston, he put these schedules together. So U.S. national team needed games, right? So, they'd come to Houston, there'd be 4,000 or 5,000 people, and, we'd play them. We had a pretty distinctively foreign, we had guys from Yugoslavia on our team, the former Yugoslavia, Brazilians, Beto de Santos, who's Gio de Santos' uncle, Jose Neto from Brazil. So it's just where the game
Portuguese, was. Right?
Yeah. Manny Neves, Portuguese guy.
Neves.
So, we had Manny Andrzejewski, who played for Southampton. So it was that's just the way the times were then,
So transitioning now out of kind of being a player, how did being a player influence you as a broadcaster? How would you say that's really helped you?
I would say the experiences, the coaches you've played under, what you learn from your teammates. One of the greatest teachers for me was my first year playing was a British guy named Peter Carr, to this day, who took me aside and taught me some subtleties that changed my game immensely. So I would just say that that's part of it. And then, the other part of it was really youth coaching, where you have to bring out coaching points. You have to be very clear to young kids, right? You can't wow them with words or you lose them. You only have a limited amount of time to get an idea across, and you learn to keep things simplified, right? Simplicity is genius. So, I heard Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones the other day talking about music, and his drummer Charlie Watts, and he said something like silence is your canvas, and I thought that was pretty prophetic in a way. And it's the same thing with broadcasting, right? To me, it's never been to assault people with a tsunami of words, because you'll lose them. It's simplicity, it's clarity. When you're on TV, you use the natural sound in the building. It's all these things. Going quiet sometimes is the best thing you can do as a broadcaster. I think it's all of the combined. It's It's playing. It's guys you played with. You learn from your coach. You get into youth coaching. You learn how to be a communicator.
So, kind of diving into that, you've called World Cups, you've called Olympic soccer. What would you say has been the greatest game you've ever called?
Well, I get asked that a lot, and it's very hard because I can't like do a quick Rolodex flashback in my mind of all these games. It depends on how you would define great. Would it be quality of game, attendance? Um, your first game, you remember. I mean, I can remember things after the first game that Bill Land, who was the play-by-play guy, I started as an analyst, and he's now the San Antonio Spurs play-by-play man, and just the best guy you could ever break in with. And I remember looking at him in '94 after doing an indoor game, and that's where I started the Houston Hotshots at the Summit. It was the Summit then; it's now Osteen's Church. And I said, man, I'm tired. He looks at me and he smiles and he goes, big boy. He says, beats working. That's
I
all.
love that.
That's all he said. But I've done games in the LA Coliseum with 95,000 people in Barcelona, and Ronaldinho coming out like a rock star, waving a flag. I've done Cristiano Ronaldo games there. World Cups, Olympics, all these things. And I've also done games in the LA Coliseum with a little table and 20 parents around me as we're doing a USC women's soccer game, and that was in the same year, which was the great reminder to me that no matter what game you're doing, no matter what level it is, you give 100%, and I take enjoyment out of every game I do, whether it was the big show and superstars of world soccer, right on down to college players. It's all genuinely fun, and I take it serious.
Like little tidbits here and there that are just taking me back to my youth. And when you said Houston Hot Shots, I still remember those commercials I used to run on local access. That was the first game that my dad took me to. We would always see the Houston Hot Shot commercials, and just because of that commercial, we finally checked it out ourselves. And then fast forward, I remember 2006 hearing that San Jose was coming to Houston. A part of me really wanted them to bring back the Hot Shots name. But sorry, I just had to chime in that little
Oh,
tidbit
but
there. Just took me back.
you're saying something very important because, and this is one thing I think we have not done good enough as a Houston soccer community, and that is honor our past in soccer. Seattle's not the only one that has a past professional soccer history. Ours goes back to the late '60s. In fact, Real Madrid played here against West Ham United in I think '66 or '67. It was a year after England won the World Cup. The captain was Bobby Moore. Well, when they played that game in the Astrodome, which was the first game ever, Bobby Moore was on West Ham United. So, these are incredible facts and history. So you had the Houston Stars, Houston Hurricane, the Houston Dynamos that I and a lot of guys were on. Then you segue into Houston Hotshots, which was indoor soccer. And then you get to current day Dynamo, who come from San Jose. So every one of these teams had guys that ended up working in youth soccer, and they all left their own legacy and influence on people. And I wish I don't think people know that history, in fact, and we need to do better with that because it's a source of pride.
I completely
That's
agree.
my biggest thing. We have this dynamic, Brandon and I. It's like good cop, bad cop, because I'm the grumpy old soccer guy. Everything annoys me. It's not good enough, but that is a box that I will not step off of. There's such a rich history of soccer in Houston, and unfortunately, I don't think the Dynamo do a good enough job of embracing it, of telling the story. They have the largest platform out of any of us, and we don't
But it's
really
hard. If you're from out
talk
of
about that.
market, it's hard for you to know this stuff. If you're from out of
Hmm.
market, you know, you know, unless you're really deep diving, but it is another way to attract people to games. I mean, it's amazing. I'll go to games and somebody will come up. Yeah, I remember watching you at Butler Stadium out on South Main. Linfield from Ireland was here, or you guys played the you guys played the Leones Negros from Guadalajara, and it's like, and I look at him, are you older than me?
No, but Colb's like kind of touched on it. That's actually something we've talked about in the off season, doing as kind of like a deep dive into the podcast, is literally how the history of the Dynamo has come to fruition. Because as you mentioned, there's such a huge diversity here in Houston that I feel like a lot of people don't understand how we've even gotten here to this point. And from indoor and how big it was to kind of now where we are, have taken over San Jose. I think that's actually something that would be extremely interesting to most listeners and something that even the biggest fans don't know.
Yeah, and young guys like you, if you take that mantle, it's great because people get tired of me talking about it. It's like, here he goes again. He's talking about Houston soccer history, but for those of us who are 100% football, soccer, whatever we want to call it, this does mean a lot to us. And
Absolutely.
and this connection can be brought into the current stadium. And you know what? 15 years from now, people are going to be talking about this team and Artur and Hector Herrera. And you have to remember that. Time waits for no one. It just keeps going forward. But a little look back once in a while is a great reminder. I mean, look at 2006 and 7, the great team we inherited, by the way, which was a gift to Houston. That's
Yep.
what I always say. It was a gift.
Yes.
You look at that team and you look at where the league was. It was 11 or 12 teams. And then you fast forward to now and look where this is. Back then the coach could be the GM like Dominic Kinnear, right? Now you have to have a full-blown scouting system. You're selling players to Europe, hopefully. Stadiums, infrastructure. It's pretty mind-blowing when you really stop, pause, and think about it.
It's kind of trickled down in the soccer pyramid. I mentioned I worked in USL, and even I was talking to some NPSL folks, and nowadays the owner can't be the head coach. The owner can't be the GM. They have certain requirements now. And in my head, I was like, man, I remember 5, 10 years ago, the NPSL was what, a guy would get a group of friends together, throw out a team, and there you go. But now there's requirements. And so I feel like the MLS, as much slack as it does get, it's done a great job of kind of setting a certain standard, and it's kind of sprinkled down throughout the U.S. Soccer Federation.
Well, and let's not forget the influence of, you having worked in the USL. I mean, the USL, NPSL, all of them have an influence on the soccer community, right? I mean, there's some
Big time.
USL teams that are pushing the borders of drawing as well as, or maybe are drawing better than some MLS teams, right? And they're totally integrated in their community and connected to people. And it's a source of pride for a community. And at the end of the day, it's growing the game. And, look, there are guys that get into it who are not funded enough and it ends up not making it. But you need those dreamers, you need those people that push it forward.
So, Glenn, I got 2 more personal questions for you before we start diving deep into the Dynamo. One silly and one a little bit more serious. First, the silly one, though. You have a pretty famous niece, Hannah Davis. She's married to a baseball player a lot of people might know of, Derek Jeter. Do you and Derek ever kind of talk about who was the better captain?
No, I don't think Derek's that interested in my soccer career, but I do. I have met him many, many times, whether in the Virgin Islands or in Florida. What I love about him, and you don't even have to ask him anything, is that he's authentic baseball, right? Like I'm authentic soccer. Obviously, I'm a lot older than him, but and he had a little bit better career, I think, in his sport than I did in mine.
Barely.
Debatable.
But but the authenticity. I mean, if you listen to him on some of the broadcasts now in the playoffs, in baseball, I mean, just comes through. Extremely disciplined guy, and very lucky to be married to my niece Hannah.
So
Can I just say,
go ahead.
Sorry, I hope to one day run into Derek Jeter just so that I can call him Hannah Davis's husband. Like
Exactly.
just, act like I don't know him. Like, hey, aren't you Hannah Davis's husband?
Well, when you're a family member and you see things that are put out there, oh, she married him for the money. I'm like, yeah. Pretty well on her own, by the way.
Yeah.
She was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and her whole career took off because Ralph Lauren um, picked her kind of out of a picture or lineup or something. I mean, it was a crazy story of a photographer in the Virgin Islands who took her picture to New York. So anyway, she was a great
Incredible.
athlete. She was a great tennis player, excellent volleyball player. I was really hoping she was going to play sports in college. I kind of was against the model route, but what do I know?
Worked out in the end.
Yeah,
So
I'm just
now,
the
kind of
uncle.
for
Uncles they can only go so far with their opinions.
yeah, they're more of the cool uncles. So now, kind of more of the final kind of personal question for you. You have a charity called Kick Cancer. How did that become a passion of yours, and kind of what does it entail?
That goes to my sister. My sister has been a huge advocate of rare diseases, cancer. Has worked in the industry her entire life. She started as a registered nurse at Sloan Kettering in New York. She's married to an oncologist. She really imparted upon me the importance of doing things for other, and it kind of came through her influence, with people that are fighting and struggling. So, we do clinics. Cypher Dynamos is a great partner. SG1 here in Houston has. We started off. We had a ton of clubs doing it in the beginning. We've kept it going. It entails visits to hospitals with soccer balls to kids with a cancer patient that's survived. Because I think for me, they're the best example to anybody is that someone that has gone through it can speak and connect with kids. But I just felt everybody is supposed to do something in their community that is for others. And then the other thing is, we have the Soccer Matters T-shirts and hats, which is, I'm going to do a selfless plug here, but there's a great company called LamontBrands.com, and that's where we have these T-shirts and hats, and the proceeds go to a local 501c charity, a great 501c called Snowdrop Foundation. So that's all. I mean, I'm not changing the world. We're not doing $1 million banquets. We did bring over, with the help of our great friend Tom Clare, who just recently passed, the author. He recently passed with cancer. Tom was like this incredible writer, detailed, grew up watching Manchester United way, way back and had these amazing stories. But he helped us get, former United players over here like Brian McClare, Norman Whiteside, the legendary Alex Stepney was here. And we did these banquets that would raise money. And we're hoping to revive that. It got kind of hit with the pandemic, but it's just, we all have to do a little something for somebody other than ourselves, right?
Completely agree.
Before we transition, can you spell out Lamont Brands, Glenn?
Yes, LAMONTBRANDS.com, LamontBrands.com, run by two great guys, the Lamont brothers. And these guys are like, if you ever seen twins that you can't tell the difference, it's these two guys. I mean, it's incredible. But you got a really cool printing company, and they'll take care of you. And they also, have partnered with me on this, the T-shirts and hats.
That's one of the beautiful things, as we mentioned, talking about platforms. That's one of the great things with this sport. It provides a platform for proceeds like you have going on with the kid cancer. So any listeners, again, that's Lamont Brands. Love to have you go out there, buy a shirt, and support Glenn's fundraiser.
Yeah, around the country, we've had a lot of different. It's really cool because some of my youth soccer teammates, I'll get this picture, from my neighbor who we played soccer all, named Johnny Waraxa, right, who had a family of 7 kids, and I get this picture from the Jersey Shore, and they're all wearing a Soccer Matters T-shirt. I mean, it's incredible. So it's just super uplifting, and just that people would care that much.
That's awesome, man. Seriously. Well, let's try to transition now, kind of dive into a little bit of Dynamo going on right now. Yeah, right. Get more serious now. So let's first start. Let's kind of talk about like the team as a whole here, and let's go individual first. What player would you say has probably impressed you the most this season?
Ooh, that's a very difficult question, but I think the straw that stirs the drink. It's pretty obvious. It's Hector Herrera. I think all of us There was a little question mark coming into the year of how engaged Hector was. And, I heard some things that potentially he might not be coming back out of Mexico. So I'm just being very upfront here. So I think the big question was his engagement. And I think we got the answer. He has been absolutely spectacular as a leader. You can watch very closely, as you guys know, the subtle things that he does as a captain to engage others, bring people together. I think he laid on, it might have been Aliou Ibrahim's first goal. I think it was a chance that he could have put away, and he squares it to him so he can side foot it into an empty net. I think it was Aliou. Anyway, these little subtle things, his leadership, his decision making, his pedigree, and the buy-in that all the teammates have. I mean, can you imagine sitting across the locker room and knowing you're going into a game with Hector? Clearly, best 11 this year in MLS for me. But I think it's just all the different things he brings, whether it's his range of passing, and I think he's enjoying his football beyond belief because he's a playmaker. This is not the role he had at Atletico Madrid. This. I think there's I just see a free spirit in a way of enjoyment coming out of his game. And I think that is a really powerful thing to notice. And then I think he's got just this amazing kind of axis relationship with Artur that really is, that's the heartbeat of the team.
He posted, speaking of his buy-in, he posted, I want to say 2, 3 weeks ago, a photo of his son's middle school American football photo. And I was like, okay, Hector's bought in. He's a Texan now. So that was good to see. And hopefully his family's enjoying their time in Houston as well.
Well, and Hector's important because we've needed a face of this franchise for a long, long time. And I think you're getting it with him. I think you're getting it with Ben Olsen as a coach. You got this great competitive staff that's turned it around with 17 changes. So, teams need a face. The Dynamo have been faceless for a long, long time.
So kind of impacting, outside of the player role, Ben Olsen, now that he's come in as coach, how would you say he's really impacted this squad?
Well, first, I think, this was a signing that if we're really being honest, took on a level of skepticism by a lot of people in the beginning, right? The first thing everybody thinks is, it's old for
talking to Jamal, who is.
Yeah. Why wouldn't we be? I mean, if we weren't, then what's the point of being involved in soccer, right? There are people skeptical of me. I mean, they're going to be skeptical of you after this. That comes with the territory. I don't think that swayed Ben Olsen at all. He didn't have a very big budget to work with in DC either. But I think there's some other things organically that have happened. And the next time I do an interview with them, it's going to be a little bit of, what have you learned in this process at some point? But, the narrow type of setup they have with inverted wingers, really didn't have a lot of width in the beginning of the year. Yet, from a defensive standpoint, you could see this is where they were building from. So I think he's a great leader. I think one of the things he's done is manage players well because, over the course of this season, this is all about timing it right. You guys know that. As much as Cincinnati won the Supporter Shield and has put this amazing body of work together, in St. Louis in the Western Conference, bottom line is just like Major League Baseball, when it's over, it's over. And this is a second season. And this is an absolutely clean slate. This is a playoff system. And in a New York minute, you can be gone if on a bad referee's call or a key player getting injured. There's no guarantees just because you've had a great season. You can talk to the Atlanta Braves, I think, about that. You can talk to the Dodgers about that in MLB. But the way these leagues are set up, it doesn't really reward, the all year long consistency, which is what I love in football. I'm sure you probably do. I love Artur because Artur's game in and game out consistent at what he does, and he has a lot of responsibility. So, I mean, from the standpoint of having that sort of think tank of Ben Olsen, having gone through this, having made playoffs, I think it's His leadership has been positive. I think he's been a breath of fresh air. And I think based on the way MLS works, you have time to get things right, right? I mean, the first 10 games of the year, we're going, is this team ever going to score a goal? How are they going to score goals, right? You got 5 guys up front who don't have a history of scoring goals. And now they seem to be, a much better goal-scoring team. But that will still be a question going into the playoffs.
So in this case, I know we talked about Hector giving him his flowers. In this case, which player do you think doesn't get enough praise?
Well, I guess we've already gone over the importance of Hector and the importance of Artur, right? And it's great business that they're getting ahead of this. And they have him re-signed with options, I think, through 2026 or 7.
27.
Yeah, I think that's what you build off, and then you build off your system of play, purpose of play, whatever you want to call it. I think that the word these days is game model. You got to keep up with your languaging in soccer as it gets different. But I think, we're not fools out here. When you look at a midfield that's going to include Hector Herrera, Artur, and Coco, no matter what else you have, you can right away say you're going to be competitive. We knew that at the beginning of the year. Okay? So then that's supplemented by important signings, surprises that have occurred. So you're asking me what player would that be? I would think, for me, and I don't think this would surprise people, but I think the emergence of Griffin Dorsey, the width that he brings to the Dynamo, the fact that teams had to look differently at the Dynamo once he came in during the Leagues Cup. Is it Leagues Cup? Yeah, Leagues Cup. Nations League. I think I was watching something Nations League. Leagues Cup. I think this is incredibly understated how important what he brings to the table now. And I will tell you that the development of him, forget about the physical side. We all knew he could run box to box longer than anybody, right? We knew he had the physical capability. But the polish that he now has on the game, the understanding positionally, I think now is a real challenge for opposing teams. So it dovetails perfectly. You always want one aspect to enhance another aspect, right? So if you're a good team playing in tight and you do a lot of 1-2s and you're capable of breaking people down via combination play in the pass, well, guess what? If you got width also, that pulls people out. It gives you a little bit more space. So the aspect of things playing off each other is again, I think, understated. And what he has brought, he to me now is fundamental to their team. And in fact, the guy who was brought to be the right back has had to make way for him and is playing left back in Escobar.
Yeah.
Just to let you know, Glenn, that was the only right answer to the question. We had this exact talk on our last
Is that what you
episode,
guys
and
are
we
on the
both
same page?
Yeah.
we said the same thing. Yeah, we talked about it last week. Staying on the subject of Dorsey, do you attribute that more to Ben, or is that more of him being amongst the Herreras, the Arturs, the Cocos? Where do you attribute this newfound success for somebody like Dorsey?
All of the above. And also his desire and work ethic, which, I've had him on the radio. I think you can just see it, right? But It's everything. It's the container you build. When you build a container and you change 17 players out, and you had a lot of guys that, were so beaten down in the past of not being a good team. There was just too many of them. You had to move them on, right? And all you have to do is look at what was put out in the past as to what is being put out now. You don't have to be a genius to figure out. Sometimes it's simply just about better players, okay? And that's not being disrespectful, or sometimes it's, look at Griffin Dorsey in this container, to your point. If you're training every day with Hector Herrera and guys that are demanding and competitive, all ships rise with the tide, right? That's the way it works. You want all these elements, right? You want healthy pressure from the media. You want internal competition. You want a coaching staff that can get the best out of you. You want it all. It can't be one, right? So in the past, there was a lot of smoke and mirrors going on, in my opinion, before
Mm-hmm.
Ted Siegel took over. And a lot of people get mad at me because I might have said something. That's not being disrespectful to anybody. By the way, you don't think Tim Parker would have had a better season with Hector Herrera and Artur in front of him in that midfield? Come on. You're
I mean,
only as good as the center back as what's in front of you. By the way, he'll probably end up being best 11 in St. Louis. So, and I remember when he was here, people criticizing him. Oh, he's not a good center back. Now he may be best 11 with St. Louis. You know, guys that are surrounded by better players don't have to assume as much responsibility and can focus a little bit on their game. When you ask people to do things they're not capable of, it's a little unfair to them too, right? I mean, I think in the past we had teams that we were asking players to do things that maybe they weren't capable of. And that didn't make them bad players. It just meant that the mix wasn't right. The quality of your leadership on the team and your players, the high end, wasn't good enough.
No. Just to hit on what you were saying, we had talked about as well. It seems like it's contagious this year. Mikael, Baird, these guys were getting harped on for having terrible seasons, and they just don't have it. And again, we were discussing before if it was Ben or more so being around the likes of Herrera, but everybody has just turned a page, and it seems like the Leagues Cup was the biggest blessing for this club. The club prior to Leagues Cup, the club post Leagues Cup, two different clubs, and I don't know
100%.
what happened in that time frame. But there are certain players like those three that we mentioned that have just really benefited since the Leagues Cup. And I mean, hats off. Like you said, there was a lot of smoke and mirrors before. For me, what really kind of showed that Siegel was putting his money where his mouth was when he bought that property next to the stadium, the bank for the headquarters. And I'm like, okay, like Ted gets it. Ted knows that it starts from the inside, and you build a culture. And for me, Ted has done all the right things. I complain a lot about a lot of the actions with Pat and Ben, but as far as Ted, that guy, I'm completely bought in with Ted and
Well,
what
Ted
he's doing
knows
for the
real
club.
estate too. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
Ted knows real estate also. So, yeah, but I think to your point, it does add to the air of professionalism, right? He wants his, that's a symbolic place now, and will become a more symbolic place as time goes by. Back to your point, I made the example of Parker. You made a great example of Corey Baird, right? Who's
Yeah,
not going to play better? Who's not going to play better if you got Hector Herrera engaged and a stronger midfield behind you, right? So I think that was an
Exactly.
excellent example as well of a holdover who's performing at a different level here.
Well,
But I think the investment in the competitive side is where Ted Siegel deserves a big pat on the back because Sporting, Pat Onstad, Mendelson, Asher, coaching staff, a lot of this has been put together wisely, and admittedly, they said, "Look, we made mistakes." They made mistakes with the Paulo Nagamura hiring, not on Paulo, but they didn't get the guy they wanted initially, which was Mastroeni. So they were kind of over a barrel, and they had to make a choice. But I think all of us, we learn every day, right? And it's fallen together. They've made some really astute moves. They've added guys. I think the Sviatchenko signing is a massive signing, more important than people think. The professionalism of that guy. He's a guy on that line of the team it's like a Hector Herrera in midfield. So the investment in the competitive side is huge because you've overturned the roster.
So kind of staying in there with the center backs right now, obviously Svechenko has really set himself kind of the standard, but there's, speaking of guys that have made the jump, Bartlow, Mikael, they have really risen their play. And then also Teenage as well. We're going to have a logjam of who's going to get that second start at the center back there. Going into the playoffs, who do you think are going to be the main two kind of trotting out there?
I think it's pretty clear. I think it's Sviatchenko and Mikael. And by the way, Mikael is another great story. And I think the Dynamo will target, obviously, in the future, but their academy has to start to begin to produce. And they have to get into the buying and selling a players game, which I think they're slowly getting into. but you need the academy to produce because you need, quote unquote, against the salary cap, cheap labor, right? So Mikael is a great story. It's not costing you much. He's emerged. He clearly can give you options now as to what to do at the center back position because you've got 4 good center backs back there. And maybe it's a 5th with Daniel Steres, right? For sure.
Yeah.
So you've got some leeway there. That's a champagne problem. But when you look at a guy like Mikael and Griffin Dorsey who aren't hitting your cap, and they're starting defenders for you, this has to happen in MLS. You have to get guys both out of your academy, homegrowns, that then don't count a lot against your salary cap, but that are real starters that can do real things for you, not just prop them up. You can prop up a ton of kids that were signed out of the academy that never did anything in MLS, right? Okay, good marketing moves, I get it. The day of the marketing move is over. You get judged on whether you can move players through that can actually take on the burden of being a professional soccer player, get minutes for you, and then you get something out of them. Maybe you win something with them in their first 3 years, and then their value increases and you can potentially sell them. That's the dream.
So you kind of touched on the cap a little bit. I kind of want to dive in a little bit, kind of a broader spectrum there. With the addition of Messi and the deals that they've had to make from Apple and Adidas, do you think eventually the cap is something that the days are numbered in MLS, or are owners too entrenched on the money profit that the machine produces out, and they're going to try to keep the cap at all costs?
No, I think that's going to expand. I think they made it pretty clear that's a priority to expand it. Now, where it gets expanded, I don't know. The beauty of the setup of MLS, which is a centralized league, was, this is going to, in the beginning, help you to survive, right? Like I played in all these leagues where we were playing in a league championship and we knew it was our last game and the league was crumbling. And, there were guys saying they didn't want to play, the veterans, and then there are young guys like me going, no, we got to play, playing for a title. Without knowing what the future was. These guys had been through it. I had. So I think that's a no-brainer. That'll happen. Let's see if other teams decide to try and go after, bigger name stars, next level guys in the future as maybe MLS becomes even more of a place to come. I think lifestyle is always a consideration. That's always in your back pocket when selling, someone to come to MLS, right? So, no, I think that will be expanded. And look, if we sat in a room with all the owners, there may be a couple of guys going, no, we want the cap to stay here. We don't want it. No, this is fine, right? The danger of the way this league is set up is what occurred to us in the past in Houston. It was looked upon as an investment, right? And then we paint a picture to the public. And the picture to the public is, oh, look at all the things we're doing. And I'm not saying things weren't being done, but they weren't investing in their team. You couldn't, as a fan, honestly, and me even as a commentator, and my honesty gets me in trouble, I couldn't sit there and say, this team and this club is trying to win a title.
Yeah.
Right? I couldn't. I'm sorry for that.
I tell people.
But that's the truth.
One of the strengths about Houston, I tell folks, I feel also hurts us, and that is the soccer fan in Houston is educated. They know good soccer. They're Liga MX fans. They're EPL fans. So when you give them that fluff, and we have the soccer team for Houston, and we're going to do our best, and they see what's on the field, they're like, wait a second, that's not a good soccer team. So I felt like with the past Dynamo teams, when you're trying to sell them on being competitive, the soccer fan in Houston is educated. And again, that is a pro, but at the same time, it is a con because they're quick to see that's not good soccer. So I completely agree with you there.
I love the fact that you make that statement because, every single night I go in to do a radio show, I know that there are people listening that know a lot about the game. I know that. You have to respect the culture. And I think, some of the people that have been running the club in the past do not have a soccer background, like a kid in a candy store, and they're making soccer decisions, and you're shaking your head. And to this day, some of that baggage made it very difficult for the new owner to come in here and do work, whether that's relationship with the youth community and the things you've done there. We can go on and on, but the past is the past. You got to learn from it. You got to have context. I hear Hector saying, "Well, where are the fans?" I don't know if Hector knows the context of how beaten down it was, in the past. And I don't think people understand that if it's beaten down yearly, right? Every year you do that again, you are conditioning people not to come back.
I agree.
And that makes it
You
harder
get
for the
jaded.
group. So that now makes it harder for the group that comes in to get out of this thing. And it's going to take time, but First Start is a very good product on the field now. Aesthetically, for me, as good as anything that we have ever seen in Houston. And if there was ever a type of football being played that can attract, to your point, the authentic soccer fan, you got it.
This is it.
If
That's a sorry, Brandon.
no, you're good.
But before we switch subjects, that is one thing that I think a lot of people forget about. The soccer wasn't great on the field for those authentic fans, but a lot of things were happening behind the scenes with the youth communities that also turned a lot of people off. So when Ted took this endeavor, I remember thinking, like, I don't know if he knows how big of a problem we have. I think they've made a lot of steps towards the right direction, in my opinion. One of those big things was losing the association with the youth groups, which I think was a very important move, because you want to help everyone. Like you said, a rising tide raises all ships. You want to help everyone grow, and you don't want people to look at Dynamo as the enemy or as
That
competition.
was a
So I think they're
divisive.
slowly making
That was a divisive. That ended up being
big
incredibly
time.
divisive. That was a move made by the former team president, Chris Canetti,
Yeah,
and a guy named Don Gemmell. That that was not with the future of the Houston Dynamo. Uh, you know, to dominate your youth community that is tantamount to suicide. To say you're going to try to
yeah.
dominate the youth community and put a jersey on everybody is the dumbest and weakest thing you can possibly do. As the pro club, you have to extend the olive branch. You got to work with everybody, whether you like them or not. You have to stay above board always. And
And that was
I
one thing that
cringed
now
when
that
I cringed.
and unfortunately, now that I'm no longer there, I can kind of speak on this, but the Toro's whole business model came from that group that were with the Dynamo whenever all that was happening. So a lot of those mistakes were made down here as well, and you kind of see a lot of the results of that, unfortunately. But kudos to Pat and Ted for the moves they've made so far. I think they're going in the right direction. It's going to take a while. You have to earn people's trust back. The quote, "Earn my business." We have to earn their business back because of what's happened in the last decade or so.
But sticking with the business, are we eventually going to hit a problem here for the everyday fan? I mean, for instance, we're both season ticket holders, but with the effects of Messi, ticket prices are going up. Are they going to start to outprice the fan eventually for season tickets or even a game day ticket?
Good question to ponder, probably for somebody better than my pay grade, but I always think you have to produce value. If you really want the authentic soccer fan, and you're not going for the rocket fan or you're going to have the right pricing. You got to have cold beer priced at a good price. There are basics. I mean, if you want people sitting in 90-degree heat, then the authentic fan is who you want. They're the ones who are going to sit in the heat because they're there for the game. And I'm not saying people aren't there for the game now. They are. And there are a lot of authentic fans that are currently going to Dynamo games. But that's just a giant cornucopia of potentials out there, right? And unique fans. And when you say unique, they're ones that you can earn. So I don't know. The league, you guys see the trends. A lot of times, a lot of teams do the same things. I think originality and creativity in your own market is something you really have to seek out. And you can't get that unless you have people from the Houston area giving you those ideas. That can't come from somebody that comes out of market and comes in generally. Um, you know, uh, so they're just things to ponder.
looking kind of bigger picture, a little bit more kind of a prediction here, because I know Jamal's mentioned that he's done USL work and everything like that. USL is trying to head towards a promotion and relegation system. Do you ever think that could reach MLS?
I never say never. I don't know if it's in my lifetime. I mean, there is a safety about MLS investment as owners, right? Because everybody gets a piece of the pie. If we could foreshadow and look into our crystal ball one day and say, does it ultimately, kind of break away from that model? Everything has to evolve. I don't know, but I think the test of USL promotion and relegation. Yeah, I think it would be very, very interesting to watch. I think it adds consequence. I think the problem always is trying to make sure that your regular season has consequence, but also being aligned with the excitement of the playoff system, right? And we know this is a playoff league. And we know when decision day is done, nobody cares except in Cincinnati and St. Louis that they won the division. Nobody cares, okay? Because now it's a clean slate, and that's the beauty of it. You keep a lot of fan bases engaged because you now have 63% of the teams making the playoffs, right? So there are going to be teams that turn into a different animal. Like if you look at the Dynamo right now, you're not betting against them in the playoffs because they've got momentum. So now my next thing is, where are the Dynamo going to be after this extended layoff in Portland? I mean, that's how you got to look at it. Yeah, we're really high and great things are happening, but the next little thing to check off is, where are they going to be in Portland? What type of soccer are they going to play? How sharp will they be? How important, can they make sure they nail down a home field advantage in the playoffs? That's where it is. So it's exciting.
So you kind of mentioned it. What is your playoff expectations for the Dynamo going in?
Listen, we've seen it all, right? You guys have followed this league. We have seen every type of different scenario. We've seen Dynamo teams in 11 and 12 that didn't have great regular seasons, go all the way to MLS Cups, right? I don't think it's as easy to do that anymore, but I do think that, anything has possibly happened. So if the Dynamo go deep in the playoffs, it will not surprise me. They are a difficult team to play against. You don't want to play against them. They don't concede goals. If they get the first goal in a game, they can manage games out with the way they play and with their ability in nurturing the ball and the decision-making that they get through Hector Herrera. So sky's the limit, really. Nobody's putting the marker on them, just because this is the first good season in a long while, and it's happened over the last 2.5 months. You saw it building. So they're timing it right, I think.
So Jamal and I had a discussion about which player do we think is probably the most key going into the playoffs. Obviously, I think the easy slam dunk answer would be Hector. So outside of Hector, who are you saying has to show up for us to really make a run?
Well, I think you would have to point to goal scoring, because I think that will still be the question going into the playoffs. Remember, we left some points on the table that would have made things a little bit easier for us, right? Even if you look at the Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup victory, right? That game should have been signed, sealed, delivered in the first 45 minutes. If we're going to be picky here, okay? Yep. And some people are probably going, hey, shut up. I mean, we won the trophy. But that's the way you have to kind of analyze it, because it's been a little hit or miss in the goal scoring department. They don't have an out-and-out goal scorer. They have found ways to get goals from so many people. I don't know why that wouldn't continue, but that to me is going to be really the question. Their chance creation is up beyond belief from the first 10 games of the year. And a lot of that comes to getting, I believe, additional width, and then figuring out exactly where Amin Bassi needed to play, and some of these other real subtle, interesting things that have happened in what is an amazing story this year. So, but for me, being clinical and finishing, it's a simple answer, but it really comes down to kind of that front five and where the goals are coming from.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was touching on. I think
so that's a good non-answer. That would be a good coach's answer. If you wanted me to say one player, can Corey Baird continue to score goals in the playoffs?
That's who I picked as my kind of guy for. We need Scory Bear to kind of pop out there. So he needs to definitely step up for us.
That's, I mean, you hit on somebody else too that we kind of forget about. Quinones. That was another guy that I didn't think he was coming back after when his loan stint was over, the initial couple months of the season, and then it's like something turned on at the right time for him because had he waited a little longer, I think Quinones is back in Colombia with his parent club and turned on at the right time, and then it's also kind of freed up Baird and our other front guys to get those scoring opportunities.
Good faith by the Dynamo to keep him. It's taken a while. It's been patient. I hear people, no, he's been turning it on as of late, and it's been more consistent. Big game. I mean, he set the tone, I think, in the Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup final at Inter Miami. There were times during the year I'd say, boy, I wish he was picking the ball up on the right side of the field and pushing it forward and going, right? Because he'd get behind people more. Now he is on the side of the field where he's more inverted. But it's taken a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of belief in him. Obviously, I'm sure the coaching staff has done some amazing work with him. But, his next level has only been in the last couple of games, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We've seen the flashes always, but it's really been in the next couple of games. So there's another good one to keep an eye on, to your point, going into the playoffs. Can Quinones keep that level of consistency, penetrating, pushing people? He's now getting behind people, and he's more of a threat cutting inside, which everybody's going to realize.
We have a conspiracy, Brandon and I, and we'll wrap it up with this last conspiracy. But we have this conspiracy given Harden's involvement with the club. In the past, him and Griezmann have had some exchanges on Twitter. They seem to be good friends. Griezmann's a big Rockets fan. Our conspiracy is that we're going to have Antoine Griezmann reunite with Hector Herrera, and that's going to be our big marquee signing in the next year or so. So when that does happen, we'd love that shout out on Soccer Matters.
There you go. You called it first. That one might have.
Called it first. So Glenn, before we let you go, we were hoping we could get I'm Glenn Davis, and this is the way we ball sound bit from you. If you don't want to, we totally understand. But that's how we'll wrap things up.
Got it. I'm Glenn Davis, and this is the way we ball.